You know, if you've ever felt like you're getting whiplash from nutritional science, you are definitely not alone. One day, coffee is a superfood, the next day, it's terrible for you. But every now and then, a study comes along that is so genuinely puzzling, it just makes you question everything. And today, we are diving into one of the biggest head-scratchers of all, the science of red meat. So, here's the mystery we're going to unpack. Just imagine this. Researchers look at data from millions of people. They find clear, undeniable health benefits from eating less red meat. And then, their final recommendation is for everyone to just keep doing what they're doing. It sounds absolutely backward, right? Well, it's exactly what happened. All right, let's get right to the source of all this confusion. We are talking about a super controversial report from 2019. It was published in a really prestigious journal, the Annals of Internal Medicine, by a group called the Nutri-Rex Consortium. Now, their whole goal was to create solid, evidence-based recommendations, but what they ended up delivering was, well, a scientific firestorm. And there it is. That's the quote. That was their official takeaway. Not to cut back, but to continue eating the same amount of red meat. I mean, you can imagine, this one sentence just sent shockwaves through the entire medical community. And to really get why it was so wild, we have to look at the very data they used to come up with it. So this is the crucial question, right? What did their own data actually say? Because this is where the mystery gets really, really deep. Before they made that wild recommendation, they did what's called a meta-analysis, which means they pulled together the data from dozens and dozens of other studies. And listen, when I say they pulled a lot of data, I mean a lot. Their analysis covered over 6 million people from 70 different studies. So this wasn't some tiny back-of-the-napkin project. This was one of the biggest reviews of data on this topic ever done. And what that data showed was surprisingly clear. Okay, get this. Their own analysis found that if people cut back on red meat by just 3 servings a week, they had a 13% lower risk of dying from any cause, a 14% lower risk of dying from heart disease, and an 11% lower risk from cancer. I mean, those are some pretty serious numbers. And it didn't even stop there. When it came to type 2 diabetes, the numbers were even more striking. The data showed a 24% lower risk of developing the disease for people who moderately reduced their red meat intake. So, I mean, the evidence for health benefits seems pretty overwhelming, doesn't it? And this brings us right back to that central, baffling question. All of their own data, millions of data points, pointed in one direction. Eating less red meat is linked to a longer, healthier life. So how in the world did they end up recommending the complete opposite? How did they justify that? Well, the researchers didn't just, flip a coin. They gave a very specific 3-part reason for their counterintuitive advice. They laid out a clear rationale for why they landed on just keep eating meat. So let's actually break down their logic. Okay, so here was their argument. First, they said the certainty of the evidence was low. Basically, since most nutrition studies just observe people's habits instead of being a perfectly controlled lab experiment, they felt they couldn't be 100% sure. Second, they took into account that, hey, people like eating meat, it's a preference. And third, they made a point to say they were only looking at direct human health. They completely ignored other huge factors like animal welfare or the environment. But is that really the whole story? Well, according to a follow-up analysis from the Mayo Clinic, there are some really critical pieces of context missing from that justification. They argue that the way this study was framed, and more importantly, what it left out, is just as important as what it actually included. The Mayo Clinic brings up a really great point about framing. The study talks about reducing meat by 3 servings a week. That sounds like a big change, right? But if you actually do the math, it breaks down to just a tiny bit less meat each day. The Mayo Clinic put it perfectly. It's basically the equivalent of taking 1 less bite of meat per day. It's a minimal change. And here's another huge point critics brought up. The analysis completely left out 2 landmark studies, the Lionheart study and the Predimed study. Now, if you follow nutrition science, you know these are major, well-respected trials that showed huge benefits from the Mediterranean diet, which, of course, is naturally low in red meat. To just not include them? That's a pretty big deal. And remember how the researchers made a big point of saying they were only looking at health? Well, many argue that you just can't do that. Other research shows that reducing red meat consumption can slash your personal environmental footprint. We're talking land use, water, energy, by a massive 72%. That is a gigantic factor to just decide to leave on the cutting room floor. So what are we supposed to do with all this? We have a study where the recommendation seems to completely contradict the data. It's confusing. This is where the Mayo Clinic suggests we all just need to take a step back and look at the bigger picture, using a core principle of good science. And that principle is called the totality of evidence. Look, science is rarely about one single study that changes everything overnight. It's more like building a case, slowly gathering pieces of evidence from lots of different sources over many years. So instead of getting fixated on one controversial report, the idea is to weigh everything we know from all the research that's out there. And when you do that, when you look at that totality of evidence, the huge body of research from decades of work, the general consensus is still pretty clear. It points toward the health benefits of reducing red and processed meat. So the Mayo Clinic's final take is that it's probably wise to stick with the established dietary guidelines instead of throwing everything out because of one very confusing outlier. Which really leaves us with a final thought. And it's bigger than just red meat. It's about how we all process scientific news. When a new study comes out with a shocking headline that goes against years of research, maybe the first step isn't to toss out everything we thought we knew. Maybe the answer is to ask deeper questions, to look at that totality of evidence, and to always consider what might be missing from the picture.